Hi, everybody. So yes, my name is Senni Määttä, and I'm talking about the work in progress collaborative paper that I've been working on with David Rudolph and Geraint Ellis. And our topic is the management of social acceptance of wind energy, which we studied using a governmentality approach in a comparative analysis of Ireland and Denmark. So I'll be first discussing social acceptance research and how our study fits into it. Then I will discuss the theoretical approach and what it can give to social acceptance research. Then I will introduce the analytical tools and discuss insights from both case countries and finish with some general discussion and conclusions on the benefits of the approach and implications of the results. So as we all know, increased deployment of renewable energy is needed to realize the energy transition. And wind energy comes to the forefront in this, as it is the fastest growing form of renewable energy. And local opposition has been identified as a constraint for wind energy deployment in most European countries. And because of this, majority of the social acceptance research focuses on the community responses. And less of it focuses on what governments, businesses, and others are doing, and how this complex relationship between host communities and development infrastructure is managed overall as a part of a wider governance regime. And given that this management involves attempting to shape norms, attitudes, and behavior, it's important to study the unintended and intended consequences of it and the underlying assumptions of any adopted measures. And the theoretical approach that we are using is Foucault's concept of governmentality. And the governmentality research field is really vast. There's a lot of different conceptualizations of it. But in general, it's been described that it studies the art of government or the conduct of conduct. And it's a decentralized, they study government as decentralized activity, as it doesn't derive only from the state, but is dispersed through society, through institutions and social networks. And it focuses on the how of governing, and it's a way to reveal certain ways of seeking to act upon the conduct of others to achieve certain ends. And governmentality can provide new insights into policy analysis by bringing an alternative lens to research into governance. And it has already been applied to many other fields, including policing, education, legal rights, spatial planning, and many others. And it also allows us to ask new questions about social acceptance, because it focuses less on the attitudes of local community and more on the wider institutional framework. And the importance of this wider context has been highlighted already in the earliest papers on social acceptance in the 1990s, but we still don't have adequate frames for understanding it, understanding the broader context of the sociopolitical dimension of the energy transition. So in this paper, we aim to contribute to this by firstly providing insights into the what, how, and why of the state responses to the challenges of social acceptance of wind energy, which complements the ongoing research focusing on the host communities. And secondly, by exploring the wider consequences of these responses and by providing insights into their effectiveness. Lastly, by initiating a discussion on the different phases of social acceptance strategies adopted in different countries by exploring the patterns and motivations for policy transfer. And the analytical tools that we are using are Foucaultian concepts of problematization, rationalities, and technologies. And firstly, problematization. It's the terms of reference within which a phenomenon is constituted as a problem. And this connects to the connects to the fact that governmentality focuses on government as problematizing activity. So when governance works around issues, it frames as problems or as something that something needs to be done about. And this problematization changes reality. So in the context of acceptance of wind energy, this could be, for example, the way in which objection is articulated as a barrier that needs a response. And the rationalities, they are the moral elaborations of government or the often unacknowledged underlying logic and forms of knowledge, which frames how an issue is understood and it shapes the way governance operates. In this case, it could be beliefs about objectors and their motivations. And last, the technologies of power or techniques of governing, they are the different measures that are taken to assess the problems. So the assemblage of practices, instruments, devices, and strategies within which a problem is addressed. It could be, in this context, for example, the specific way community consultation is done, or community benefit funds, or renewable energy targets. So with these tools, in the case of Ireland, we identified different phases for the evolution of management of social acceptance. And these are not strict timescales because these kind of changes are gradual. Firstly, before 2006, could be described as a time of denial and suppression of community concerns because acceptance issues were not really discussed in policy. And there were no community traditions of community ownership in Ireland, and the scale of the wind industry emerged as an economic sector. And then from 2006 to 2014, acceptance issues were started to be recognized, and they slowly started to emerge in policy papers. And on that time, the emphasis was on enhancing conventional planning channels, so policy making and increasing opportunities for participation. So wind energy was treated as any other kind of development. During that time, also the financial crisis in Ireland highlighted the role of wind for the wider economy with the potential for energy exports. And then from 2014 onwards, there has been quite significant change with how social acceptance has been managed. There was a few key papers around that time. There was a NESC paper on building community engagement and social support. And then there was a green paper in 2014 and white paper 2015. And around that time, there started to be a recognition that social acceptance is more of an issue and that this challenge was causing financial and time delays in projects, and that the previous practice was not sufficient enough to answer these challenges. And because of this, there started to be this reconfiguration of the relationship with communities. And started to emerge this idea of energy citizens, which would have a role in the low carbon transition. And the focus was put on making people part of the transition and involved in it. We have been calling this soft responsibilization, and there's been 3 ways that this has been done in Ireland. Firstly, it has been done through highlighting collective responsibility. So there started to emerge this discourse that citizens need to transform from passive consumers to active, engaged energy citizens. And the microscale concerns of local communities started to be weighted against macroscale benefits and goals of the energy transition and increased renewable energy deployment. So it started to be this idea that reaching these benefits and goals was the responsibility of the whole society, and everybody has, every individual has a role to play in the transition. And the second way this soft responsibilization was done was to supporting community-based action. So the focus started to be on empowering and mobilizing citizens to take small-scale action in the community domain, so in households, individual action communities, towards the wanted ends of the transition. And this was done through supporting and encouraging actions like microgeneration, energy efficiency, retrofitting, choosing green energy, and the like. And the third form how this soft responsibilization and involvement was done was with financial involvement of citizens. So making people part of the commercial and financial action of the energy transition. And this was described as reaching the full participation of communities. And this development mostly became in Ireland with the Renewable Energy Support Scheme, RES, just lately in the recent years. So in summary, the increased community resistance was answered to making communities and individuals part of the transition. And we found out that this approach came from the government, and wind energy industry was more of a follower than the innovator with the approach. And then moving on to Denmark. And in Denmark's case, we also found similar phases for the evolution of management of social acceptance. So before 2009, local acceptance was not really an issue because of strong tradition of local cooperative ownership. But this started to gradually change towards the liberalization of the energy market in 2001 as the increase in scale, commercialization, and gradual detachment of local ownership requirements increased the resistance. And from 2009 to 2019, I could be called as conducting and nurturing acceptance and shared responsibility. So the focus was on paving the way for wind energy expansion through reintroducing the financial involvement of citizens and through better participation in planning. And the idea with this better participation was that the legal requirements allow for a good process, good participation, but it still is the responsibility of all stakeholders involved to make it a good process. So there was this increasing focus on this idea that everybody should work together towards productive ends. And there was quite a big change from 2019 onwards in Denmark, which could be described as this phase of removing obstacles and avoiding conflicts. And this was done firstly by removing inconveniences and obstacles for people. So through repowering and reducing the amount of onshore wind turbines, moving towards offshore, and through mandatory compensation for people living close to wind farms. And then through removing obstacles for developers, and the obstacles in this case being the people. And this was done through property purchase. So there was this mandatory, there's this obligation for developers to, so there has been this obligation for developers to buy neighboring properties if the people are willing to sell. And this trend is linked to the trend of more market-based support schemes, tendering since 2018 in Denmark, and which made the development of wind farms a more competitive and lengthy opposition into a cost factor. So in summary, many initial policies and measures aimed towards local acceptance were related to the consequences of the local detachment of an ever-growing commercialization. So the phase from 2009 to 2019. And then the more recent measures from 2019 onwards, approximately, are aimed towards clearing the path for further growth of more cost-efficient wind farm projects. And when the evolutions, just a moment. And when the evolutions of these two countries are compared, Denmark's evolution could be summarized as moving from community dominance, so strong cooperative ownership, towards soft responsibilization, shared responsibility, and kind of whole society approach, towards harder responsibilization, removing of obstacles and inconveniences. And Ireland has moved from denial and suppression of community concerns towards regulation and participation, treating wind energy as any other kind of development, focused on regulation and participatory measures. And then towards soft responsibilization, making people part of the energy transition and involvement of people. So these countries have shared the problematization of community opposition to local wind energy projects. And even though the starting points have been almost opposite, they have eventually adopted similar measure of shared responsibility and whole society approach with the soft responsibilization. And Denmark has been the front runner in this. So the signs of policy learning between the countries. And now Denmark has evolved beyond this approach towards more harder responsibilization and removing of obstacles and removing of inconveniences. So this raises interesting questions about what will happen in Ireland next, if Ireland is going towards similar development, or if it will be different. Then I will finish with some points of discussion and key points of our research. Firstly, it seems that governmentality can provide a useful critical approach to understanding the broader context of the sociopolitical dimensions of the energy transition. And an analysis suggests that these approaches have evolved as it has emerged that the previous approaches, the previous problematizations and technological responses have failed to solve the social problem. And policy learning plays a part in this. Analysis also suggests that problematization of such complex phenomena offers a major challenge for governance, because when these complex issues are oversimplified, then the rationalities and technological responses to them cannot be effective. And this faces some raises some deep challenges for the energy transition as well, because it's full of these complex problems. And our research opens up a range of avenues for future research, which will be explored further in the further publications of the authors. So thank you for your attention. I'll give it back to Chad.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Senni. I think it was really some important comparative work you're doing there. I really appreciate, and I think we should see this more stories on the interaction between local acceptance and policy formation, and how, you know, one certainly interacts with the other, which interacts with the other. And I think you really made that really clear throughout both countries, really. Robert kind of has I think an important comment and question there about cooperatives and the history of cooperatives in Ireland, and maybe how those haven't translated over to the renewable energy space. If you're able to kind of comment or answer that quickly. Or Robert, if you want to go on and do it via video, happy to do that too.
Yeah, sure. It was just it's certainly true that there isn't, I think anyone can agree, there isn't the same culture of cooperativism in Ireland as there is in Denmark. but there are some historical examples, which is also interesting why that hasn't really had any effect. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out as well, that there are some precedents.
Yeah, I guess in Ireland it is linked to the kind of a possibility of wind energy exports, that it really emerged as a strong economic sector from the get-go.